Thank you, Zakia, very much, and good afternoon. My name is Pamela Dorsey, and today I will be speaking on building a global framework for assessing inactive ingredients in generic drug applications. And of course, this is my disclaimer slide. So today, my talk is broken up into 4 parts. I'll be providing a background of how this topic got started, followed by polling that we did to our fellow cluster participants, followed by case studies and considerations involving this topic, and ending with a discussion or summary at the end. So the background, let's dive into how this got started. So inactive ingredient evaluation assures the safety of inactive ingredients within drug products. And usually within the FDA, this occurs during inactive ingredient control correspondences or within the application itself. And for inactive ingredients, we evaluate in all populations the drug is indicated for, whether it's adults or pediatric population. And we calculate the maximum daily exposure for inactive ingredients by using the maximum daily dose from the reference listed drug label. So once we calculate the MDD, we are able to take that amount and compare it to amounts for the same inactive ingredient within approved NDAs and ANDAs. And I just want to note that applicants may also submit clinical or toxicological data to use as justification for a proposed inactive ingredient MDE in an ANDA submission. So for our cluster members, as FDA, we already know our practices for evaluating inactive ingredients, but we were curious as to what their practices for other regulatory jurisdictions. And do we have any commonalities, or are there any areas of possible alignment? So now I want to go into actually reaching out to our fellow cluster members regarding this. So the generic drug cluster is comprised of membership from ourselves, the FDA, Health Canada, EMA, the Ministry of Health, Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, Swissmedic, and the Therapeutic Goods Administration. And this cluster provides a forum to foster scientific alignment between generic drug regulatory agencies. So as I said before, we wanted to find out what were the common practices within these jurisdictions. So we polled our cluster members with 7 questions for them to respond to. So the first question, and please excuse the small print. Of course, when the responses came in, they were quite verbose. We just tried to capture, the main parts, but I'm going to do my best to summarize the key takeaways from each question. So the first question, does your agency assess the safety of inactive ingredients in a generic formulation? And if you do, how is that performed? Of course, for the FDA, we assess all inactive ingredients within a generic formulation. And if those amounts exceed, or if the inactive ingredient is found to be novel in any way, we will actually consult out to the Office of Safety and Clinical Evaluation in order to determine if that amount for that inactive ingredient is okay or not. For our generic cluster members, pretty much each regulatory jurisdiction, of course, evaluates the safety of inactive ingredients for a test product, but the approach varies. For our second question, we asked all of the cluster members, what type of data does your agency rely on during your assessment of safety? And do you maintain a database of sorts? And also, do you have a list of inactive ingredients which are unacceptable in your jurisdiction. For the FDA, of course, we have the Inactive Ingredient Database, the IID, and later you will hear a presentation about that. And we also have within our Code of Federal Regulations a list that contains inactive ingredients that have general safety concerns. So for our cluster members, a few regulatory jurisdictions maintain databases for acceptable levels of inactive ingredients, or they have a list of some kind that has the inactive ingredients which are banned in their jurisdiction. And I think the closest to the FDA at this time would probably be the EMA and Health Canada as far as those databases are concerned. So the next question, do you evaluate the MDE of each inactive ingredient based on the MDD of the drug product? If not, what's your approach? And how do you assess MDDs? And if not specified in the RLD label, do you rely on a standard weight or BSA? So for the FDA, we evaluate the MDE for each inactive ingredient within the test formulation. We use the MDD in order to calculate that MDE. And when weight is not listed in the reference listed drug label as to what to use for that dosing, we use 60 kg for the adult population. For our cluster members, for most regulatory jurisdictions, the MDD is determined from the RLD label. And if a weight is not specified in the RLD label for dosing dependent on weight, some jurisdictions kind of fluctuate between utilizing 50 or 70 kg for adults. The next question, do you differentiate between different grades for an inactive ingredient? For a solid oral dosage form? Or do you leverage data from various grades of the same inactive ingredient? For the FDA, we do differentiate between different grades for an inactive ingredient. However, we can make justifications when needed by leveraging data for various grades within that same inactive ingredient group or family. And for our cluster members, most regulatory jurisdictions, they evaluate the difference of grades for inactive ingredients on a case-by-case basis. So if this is a novel inactive ingredient or something that is given to the pediatric population, it's case-by-case as to whether or not they evaluate the different grades. For our next question, do you consider the context of use for the drug product in which the inactive ingredient is present? This meaning the population, the duration of use, or the route of administration. For the FDA, we do consider context of use. And this relates to whether the drug product is indicated in the pediatric population, the renally impaired. We also take duration of use into consideration. Is it acute, chronic? That is part of our standard practice. For our other regulatory agencies, most regulatory jurisdictions consider context of use, again, on a case-by-case basis. However, we did see a lot of responses honing in on giving special attention to drug products that are indicated in the pediatric population. The next question, how do you assess the safety of flavoring agents and colorants? So the established use for color additives can be found in our Code of Federal Regulations. And we do assess the safety of flavoring agents. Usually we look at the flavoring as a whole within other approved products. If that flavor is determined to be novel, then we go into the subcomponents of that flavor to do a further evaluation. For our cluster members, some regulatory jurisdictions state that flavorings and coloring agents must comply with criteria in their jurisdiction for food, and others have separate regulations for coloring agents. And again, kind of comparable to us, subcomponents for things like flavorings may be given special consideration if there are known safety concerns like benzyl alcohol. And the last question we pose, do you maintain a list of inactive ingredients that may need a warning statement in the label? So for the FDA, we do have a list of inactive ingredients within our CFRs, listing inactive ingredients that may need a warning label. For our cluster members, some jurisdictions do not maintain a list of inactive ingredients that may need a warning statement, and others consult internal guidelines or regulations regarding those inactive ingredients. So now I want to jump into some case studies and considerations based on the questions that we posed to our sister regulatory agencies within the cluster. So case study 1, and this goes back to the evaluation of all inactive ingredients within a drug product. So we had a case where an ANDA was submitted for drug A for a delayed release capsule. A consult was actually sent to OSCE for the evaluation of a proposed level of talc, which we found that was much higher than the maximum approved level. So talc, as you know, is generally recognized as safe as a food additive. However, talc is not absorbed in the GI tract, which may worsen GI adverse events associated with therapy for this particular drug product. At that time, adequate information could not be identified to justify chronic use of talc for this particular drug product at the proposed levels in adults and children. So we deemed the amount of talc to be unacceptable for this drug product. Case study 2. This goes to differentiating between different grades for that group or family of the same inactive ingredient. So an ANDA was submitted for nystatin and triamcinolone acetonide cream. A consult was sent to OSCE for the evaluation of a proposed level for an active ingredient X. The proposed level was much higher than the maximum approved levels for that inactive ingredient. And this related to the topical products for this inactive ingredient. So X, in this case, this inactive ingredient, is a penetration enhancer for topical products. And whereas lower weight X's for this inactive ingredient are actually minimally absorbed through the skin. So there was a concern for the increased absorption of APIs due to this inactive ingredient X. Namely for triamcinolone in children. So at this time for this particular drug product, we found that the amount of X was unacceptable and could not be justified at the time. So considerations, especially based on prior cases that we have seen and some that I've just mentioned in the case studies. Evaluation of all inactive ingredients in a drug product could prove useful, especially for vulnerable subpopulations. So the pediatric population, maybe a certain patient population. So looking into each and every inactive ingredient may be worthwhile. Additionally, evaluation based on grades may adequately define the safety profile of inactive ingredients within a specific drug product. So in summary, definitely based off of the responses that we have received from our fellow cluster members, commonalities exist between regulatory agencies in the cluster regarding evaluation of inactive ingredients for drug products. And based off of this topic, further exploration of these areas is needed to determine if we can possibly alleviate the burden on industry for justifying proposed inactive ingredient amounts while ensuring safety. And with that, I would like to acknowledge the following people for this talk. And thank you for your time and attention. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Liu and Dr. Yang.